Hello everybody, and welcome back to my show. So today we have two very special guests who are historians, and they're going to be giving us a walkthrough of the history of voting. So let's welcome them. We have Violet Vega and Nicole Fernandez here in the studio today. Let's give them a round of applause.
Hi, Jason.
Hi. Oh my gosh, it's been a while. All right.
Having us back.
It's always great to have you. It's my pleasure. All right, so let's begin. So we know that the United States formed independence through voting, and they're a democratic government. So tell us, how did colony formation introduce voting to America?
Well, let me tell you, that's a very interesting topic, not only because it's when everything sparked, but it also built the pathway for the rest of the people. So in the beginning, for example, here, let me tell you, the colonies had absolutely no say, and they were being governed by a government across the seas, which for them, it didn't make sense, right?
Right,
So
we know Great Britain was the government. They owned America. Oh, them Great Britain. Continue.
Exactly. So they grew tired of that. Multiple taxes on them, all these bills and all that stuff that they really didn't feel fair and they didn't feel represented. Decided to revolt, and that sparked the revolution.
Right, and we do know that rich white men could only vote. Tell us about that, Nicole, how the demographics of democratic voting were different back then.
So back then, only rich white men that owned land could vote, and everyone else did not have a say. So basically, they couldn't run what they wanted to do, so they couldn't basically do whatever they want. So it was not fair at all.
And then we move on to after independence, and when our founding fathers started building the Constitution, and we know first that the Articles of Confederation came in first.
We're gonna go on a break. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back. Thank you for waiting patiently. So, Violet, you were telling us about how independence was formed in the United States. How did that lead up to that moment?
Well, you see, the independence and the voting is very important in our history, not only because the framers of the Constitution couldn't agree on who should have the right to vote, so that led to them telling the states that they could decide. So they gave the states the right to decide who could vote and what criteria. Over time, the states eventually dropped the requirement that voters had to own property, and some states acted faster than others. For example, New York got rid of the property management in 1821, while Rhode Island did not change until the 1880s, which is a huge gap in between that. But that's what independence led eventually to.
All right. And Nicole, we do know that the 15th Amendment helped with African Americans being able to vote. Tell us how so.
So in the 1870s, so 5 years after the end of the Civil War, the amendment stated, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude." So basically that kind of initiated the African American votes.
Right, and at the time it was only literate African American men who could vote. And speaking of gender voting, Violet, tell us about how the ratification of the 19th Amendment led to women being able to vote.
So women gained voting rights after long, hard fight. They've been fighting for years now. And Wyoming gave women the vote in 1869, but it took the work of Susan B. Anthony, which is a key person, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and many others to get the job done. So the women won the right to vote in August of 1920. The 19th Amendment said, and I quote, "The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied on account of sex."
Wow, fascinating. Now Nicole, why don't you talk to us about how American Indian votes were important to democracy in the United States?
Yes, I shall. So American Indians were not considered citizens of the United States until 1924. And before that, they were considered members of their own tribal governments. So they weren't a person, basically. They weren't people.
Wow.
Exactly. And when you take a look at that in a perspective, you see how unfair that is. We came into a line that they owned, yet they had no rights into saying what was going on, and that's why this is important regarding voting rights, and it's a historical event.
That is truly fascinating. Now, we're going to go on a commercial break for 1 second. I'll see you in 1 minute, and enjoy your break.
Man, we're finally home. Ain't this a wonderful place?
We better get going. The plants will prompt themselves.
Ma'am, I need your taxes.
But sir, we barely got enough to feed our young ones.
I don't care. Are you tired of being pushed to the ground by your slave owner? Well, introducing democracy. Democracy is the newest form of government we all know and love. And we're back. Now, why don't you tell us about how the civil rights movement influenced the change in voting and democracy in the United States?
All right, so let me just briefly go over civil rights movement. So it basically, people just demanded civil rights for all Americans, and it was mainly towards like African Americans because they were being like put barrier after barrier, so they couldn't really vote. And the marches, speeches, freedom rides, and activities all added up to what we know as the civil rights movement. And this changed because the 24th Amendment was added to the Constitution in 1964. So it basically banned the use of poll taxes in elections, and that increased voting suffrage. And the Voting Rights Act was also signed by President Johnson in 1965, and this law specifically talks about protecting the rights for all citizens to vote. It forced the states to obey the Constitution, and it reinforced the 15th Amendment, which is the rights for African Americans to vote in the first place. And then we move forward from there. So the 26th Amendment was passed in 1971, and it says, and I quote, "The right of the citizen of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied on account of age. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote." I mean, take a look at that powerful statement, don't you think? Don't you agree, Jason?
I definitely think because it influences younger generations to vote at such an early age. Well, I thank you to both my historians, Nicole and Violet, for joining us today on my show. I appreciate everything you have done.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. And I will see you next week on my show. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.